Welcome back. Tonight's story isn't about love. It's about betrayal. And what happens after the vows break. My wife didn't just cheat on me. She chose someone else while I was still choosing her. But here's the part she never expected. The woman she warned me about. The woman she hated. The one she said would ruin our marriage. That's exactly who helped me survive it. And what happened next changed all three of us forever. If you think you know how this ends, you don't. Make sure you subscribe, because some stories aren't about revenge, they're about awakening. She didn't confess in tears. She didn't throw plates or storm out of the house. There was no dramatic moment where the world stopped and music swelled in the background. The betrayal was quieter than that. It moved through my life like a draft under a closed door, subtle at first. Easy to ignore, until one day I realized the room had gone cold. I remember the exact moment I understood something was wrong. It wasn't because I found messages or caught her in a lie. It was the way she looked at me. Or maybe it was the way she didn't. Her eyes, once warm and familiar, had become distant, like she was already somewhere else while sitting right in front of me. We were at the kitchen table, 2 cups of coffee growing cold between us, and the silence felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. Betrayal, I learned, doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides in routine. She still asked how my day was, still folded laundry, still slept beside me, but something essential had shifted. The warmth was gone. The small, unconscious touches, hand on my back, the brush of fingers and passing I felt it before I understood it, like standing on solid ground that was slowly turning to sand. When I finally found out the truth, it didn't explode. It settled. Heavy. Final. There was no screaming match. No dramatic confession. Just a quiet acknowledgement that what I had suspected was real. She didn't cry the way I expected. She didn't beg me to stay or promise to fix it. She sat there, almost calm, as if the decision had already been made long before I knew I was part of it. That calm hurt more than anger would have. If she had shouted, if she had fought, maybe I could have fought back. Maybe there would have been something to grab onto, some evidence that it still mattered. But her silence felt like a door gently closing. Not slammed. Not look, just softly shut, as if she had already walked through it and didn't plan to return. The house changed after that. It was the same walls, the same furniture, the same photographs on the shelves. But it no longer felt like home. Every room carried a question. How long had this been happening? When did she stop choosing me? Was there a moment I missed a conversation? A look? A hesitation that could have warned me? I replayed everything in my mind. Anniversaries, vacations, ordinary Tuesdays. I searched for cracks in memories that once felt solid. The hardest part wasn't picturing her with someone else. It was realizing she had been emotionally gone long before I noticed. I had been talking to a version of her that no longer existed. There's a specific kind of humiliation that comes with quiet betrayal. It's not loud enough for others to notice. Friends don't see bruises. Family doesn't hear arguments through the walls. From the outside, everything looks intact. But inside, something foundational has collapsed. You wake up next to someone who once promised forever and realize you're lying beside a stranger. The silence between us grew teeth. We still spoke when necessary. Logistics. Bills. Who would pick up groceries? The ordinary mechanics of shared life continued, but stripped of meaning. Each word felt calculated. Each glance felt measured. It wasn't a marriage anymore. It was an arrangement, slowly dissolving. And the most painful part was that I couldn't even point to a single moment and say, that's when it broke. It broke gradually, quietly, like glass cracking under pressure until one day it simply gives in. People think betrayal is defined by the act itself, the affair, the lie, the crossing of a line. But for me, it was defined by the quiet after. The way she could sit across from me and not reach for my hand. The way her apologies sounded rehearsed, detached, almost polite, as if we were negotiating a contract instead of grieving a marriage. I realized that love doesn't die in chaos. Sometimes it dies in indifference. In the absence of fight, in the steady withdrawal of effort. The absence of urgency to fix what's broken. She didn't scream when I found out. She didn't collapse into regret. She just looked tired, and in that exhaustion, I understood something devastating. She had already left in her heart. I was the last to know. The betrayal wasn't loud enough for the world to witness. There were no public scenes, no dramatic exits, just two people sitting in a house that once held laughter, now separated by an invisible wall built from unspoken truths. And in that quiet, I felt something shift inside me too. Not rage, not even immediate heartbreak, just a slow, steady realization that the life I thought I had was already gone. Revenge didn't begin the day I found out. It didn't arrive with clenched fists or shattered glass. It started in a much smaller place, a darker one. It began the moment humiliation settled into my chest and refused to leave. Anger would have been easier. Anger is loud, it gives you direction. It tells you who to blame and how to react. But humiliation is quiet and corrosive. It seeps into your thoughts when you're alone. It whispers questions you. Tanto quanto yer. Was I not enough? Did she compare us? Did she laugh with him the way she used to laugh with me? That was the real beginning. I found myself replaying memories like security footage, searching for proof that I had missed something obvious. The late nights she blamed on work, the sudden interest in her appearance, the way she guarded her phone. Each memory felt different now, contaminated. Moments I once held with tenderness now carried suspicion. I wasn't just betrayed, I felt foolish. Humiliation has a way of shrinking you. I started walking differently, talking differently. I wondered who else knew. Were our friends aware? Did they look at me with pity behind my back? I imagined conversations happening without me, my name mentioned in lowered voices. The thought that I might have been the only one unaware made my stomach turn. It wasn't just that she chose someone else. It was that she made that choice while still sleeping beside me, while still accepting my loyalty. I had been fully committed to a version of us that only I believed in. That realization cut deeper than the betrayal itself, and somewhere inside that ache, revenge began to take shape not as a dramatic plan, but as a quiet craving for balance. I didn't wake up thinking, I'll make her pay. It was subtler than that. I wanted the scales to even out. I wanted her to feel even a fraction of the disorientation I carried every day. I wanted her confidence shaken the way mine had been. I wanted her to question her worth the way I questioned mine. That desire didn't feel violent. It felt justified. I told myself it wasn't about hurting her. It was about reclaiming something. My pride, my dignity, the part of me that felt small and replaceable. Being the betrayed one leaves you in a strange position. You are innocent, yet you feel inferior. You did nothing wrong, yet you feel like you failed. Every time I imagined her with him, it wasn't the physical betrayal that haunted me most. It was the possibility that she saw something in him she no longer saw in me, that she found excitement, validation, or understanding that I couldn't provide. I started comparing myself to a man I barely knew, constructing an image of him that was taller, sharper, more confident. And in that comparison, he felt that's when revenge stopped being about her and started being about me. I didn't want to be the discarded husband. I didn't want to be the man left standing in the ruins while she moved forward untouched. I wanted proof that I was still desirable, still powerful, still capable of being chosen. Humiliation convinces you that you'd be lost value. Revenge promises to restore it. I began noticing things differently, the way other women looked at me. The compliments I used to brush off. The attention I once ignored out of loyalty. Each glance felt like oxygen to a suffocating ego. It wasn't about connection. It was about validation, about proving, mostly to myself, that I hadn't been replaced because I was lacking. The dangerous part was how reasonable it all felt. I told myself she had broken the contract first. She had stepped outside the boundaries we agreed on. If she could seek comfort elsewhere, why couldn't I? If she could prioritize her feelings, why couldn't I prioritize mine? But beneath those rationalizations was something more fragile. I didn't want to hurt her for the sake of cruelty. I wanted her to understand what it felt like to be blindsided. To look at the person you trusted most and realize they are capable of wounding you without hesitation. Revenge, at its core, was my attempt to escape powerlessness. There's a particular sting in knowing someone risked your marriage for someone else. It forces you to confront the possibility that you were not enough to protect what you built together. That realization gnawed at me. It turned ordinary thoughts into accusations. I scrutinized my own flaws. Was I too predictable? Too comfortable? Too forgiving? The humiliation became a mirror, reflecting insecurities I didn't know I had. And the more I sat with it, the more I felt the urge to tip the balance. Not with screaming or confrontation, but with action, with a choice of my own. If she could rewrite the rules, so could I. The idea of revenge didn't thrill me. It steadied me. It gave structure to chaos. It transformed me from a victim into someone who could act. Even if that action was born from pain, it felt like movement instead of paralysis. I didn't want to be the only one bleeding quietly. I didn't want to carry the weight of betrayal alone while she walked away. Somewhere in the depth of that wounded pride, I convinced myself that making her feel anything would restore the equilibrium. And so revenge didn't begin with fury. It began with humiliation, with the unbearable feeling of being diminished, with the need to stand up inside my own story again. Even if the way I chose to do it would change me in ways I didn't yet understand. She used to mention her name in passing, always with a subtle edge in her voice. Not outright hatred, at least not at first, but something close to it. A warning disguised as concern. She would call her jealous, manipulative. The kind of woman who lingered too long in conversations and smiled a little too knowingly. I didn't think much of it back then. I trusted my wife. If she felt threatened, I assumed there was a reason. It's strange how perspective shifts after betrayal. The woman my wife painted as dangerous slowly began to look different through new eyes. I had known her casually for years. She was part of our extended circle present. At gatherings, birthdays, the occasional dinner. She wasn't loud or attention-seeking. If anything, she kept her distance. She would greet us politely, exchange small talk, then drift into other conversations. There was nothing about her behavior that felt inappropriate, but my wife's tension around her was unmistakable. She's not your friend, my wife once told me after a party. She pretends to be, but she's not. I remember brushing it off, telling her she was overthinking it. I reassured her there was nothing there, nothing to worry about. At the time, I believed that completely. Looking back, I wondered if the discomfort had less to do with that woman and more to do with something unspoken in our own marriage. After I discovered the affair, the world tilted. Familiar faces looked different. Conversations carried subtext I had never noticed before. In the middle of that emotional disorientation, I ran into the woman my wife disliked so much. It wasn't planned. Just a coincidence at a cafe I used to visit alone when I needed to think. She noticed something was off immediately. I hadn't told anyone yet, but grief has a way of showing itself in posture, in silence, in the way someone stares too long at nothing. She didn't press. She didn't pry. She simply asked if I was okay, and when I hesitated, she didn't fill the silence with assumptions. That restraint felt unfamiliar. In the weeks that followed, our conversations became more frequent. At first, they were harmless. Neutral topics. Work. Books. Mutual acquaintances. She never spoke poorly of my wife, even though she had every opportunity to. If anything, she avoided mentioning her altogether. What unsettled me was how seen I felt. Not admired, not pursued, just seen. She listened without interruption. When I spoke, she didn't rush to fix or judge. There was no agenda in her tone, no subtle competition, no tension. Just presence. It contrasted sharply with the emotional distance that had defined my marriage in its final months. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman my wife labeled manipulative was the only person who didn't try to steer my emotions. The one she called jealous showed no sign of claiming space she wasn't invited into. If anything, she was careful, almost cautious with me. I began to understand something uncomfortable. Sometimes we project our fears onto others. My wife's hostility toward her may not have been about anything this woman did. It may have been about what she represented. Confidence. Independence. The kind of quiet strength that doesn't beg for validation. As my marriage unraveled, I found myself gravitating toward that steadiness. Not because I planned to, not because I wanted to prove anything, but because after betrayal, you look for ground that doesn't shift under your feet. She never once encouraged me to retaliate, never suggested I get even. In fact, she often redirected conversations away from blame. When I vented, she listened. When I doubted myself, she challenged the narrative gently. She reminded me that someone else's betrayal was not proof of my inadequacy. That distinction mattered more than I expected. There was a moment I remember clearly. We were walking after dinner, the air cool and quiet. I admitted how humiliated I felt. How small. I expected sympathy. Instead, she stopped and looked at me with something closer to disappointment. "Why are you measuring yourself by her mistake?" she asked. No one had framed it that way before. In her presence, I didn't feel like the abandoned husband. I didn't feel like the man who had been replaced. I felt like myself, unfiltered, imperfect, but intact. That shift was subtle, but powerful. And slowly, the narrative my wife had built around her began to crumble. Was she dangerous? Maybe. But not in the way I had been warned. She was dangerous to insecurity, dangerous to fragile egos, dangerous to relationships built on pretense. She had a way of exposing what was already unstable simply by existing confidently within herself. I started to question how much of my wife's resentment stemmed from comparison. Perhaps she sensed something I hadn't, a contrast in energy and authenticity. Perhaps it wasn't about distrust, but about discomfort. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized she wasn't trying to replace anyone. She wasn't circling me like a predator waiting for weakness. If anything, she seemed reluctant to step into the emotional wreckage of my life, and that restraint only made her presence more compelling. She never asked me to choose sides, never positioned herself as the better option. She simply stood there, steady, while everything else felt like it was collapsing. In the end, what drew me closer wasn't rebellion or spite. It wasn't even attraction at first. It was the relief of being understood without being pitied, of being valued without having to compete. The woman my wife hated most turned out to be the only one who didn't see me as something to win, control, or discard. When my wife first cheated on me, the world felt like it had tilted off its axis. An injustice had occurred, and my sense of balance was gone. Then I met someone else, and suddenly, being with her felt like the universe was finally righting a wrong. It was symmetrical, almost mathematical. She had chosen someone else while I was still choosing her, and now I was choosing someone too. Pain for pain, a shift in loyalty that mirrored her own. I kept telling myself it wasn't revenge anymore. It was fairness. The first time we crossed that line from just talking into something more, it wasn't some big, explosive moment. There were no dramatic confessions or sweeping gestures. It was just a quiet surrender to a connection that had been slowly building for weeks. When she kissed me, it wasn't rushed or desperate. It was steady, certain. And in that one moment, for the first time in a long time, I felt wanted again. That feeling, it was intoxicating. It was like a drug I didn't know I was craving. 4 weeks after that, I carried this newfound sense of power. I swear I even walked differently. I spoke with more confidence. The cloud of humiliation that had been following me around, clinging to me like a second skin, finally started to lift. I wasn't the abandoned husband anymore. I wasn't the man left behind, the one who wasn't good enough. I was someone chosen, and that simple fact mattered more to me than I wanted to admit, even to myself. Every time my wife looked at me, I could see she sensed something had changed. She never asked directly, but she knew. The whole energy between us had shifted. I was no longer desperately reaching for her approval, no longer trying to decode her indifference or figure out what I did wrong. I had redirected my attention, and she could feel it slipping away from her. In those early days, being with this other woman, it truly felt like justice. Not a loud, cruel kind of justice, but a corrective one. Like the scales of our relationship, which had been tilting so heavily against me, had finally started to balance out. But here is the thing I had to learn the hard way. Justice and healing are not the same thing. They aren't even on the same playing field. Late at night when the house was quiet and I was lying awake, I started to notice something unsettling. The satisfaction I felt wasn't pure. It had this undercurrent of something heavier, something more complicated. Every kiss we shared, every inside joke, every moment of closeness came with a silent question. that I tried so hard to push down. Am I here because I truly care for her, or am I here because I needed to prove to myself, and to my wife, that I could be? There's a massive difference between actually moving forward and just reacting to a situation. At the time, I had completely convinced myself that I had moved on. I told myself I had found something genuine and real in the ashes of my marriage. And to be fair, in many ways, there was something real between us. She was kind, she was present, she was honest in ways my marriage had stopped being years ago. But if I was brutally honest with myself, I knew a huge part of my motivation wasn't love. It was the restoration of my ego. Being betrayed doesn't just hurt. It fractures your sense of self. It shatters your confidence. Being desired again feels like it's stitches that wound back together. But stitches are not the same as unbroken skin. You can see the scar beneath the surface. The wound is still there, and it still needs to heal properly. There are so many moments when I would look at her and feel this overwhelming sense of gratitude, warmth, and even genuine tenderness. And then, out of nowhere, guilt would creep in. And it wasn't guilt toward my wife. It was guilt toward her. Was I really all in? Was I fully present with her? Or was she, without even knowing it, just standing in the empty space created by someone else's damage? True healing requires stillness. It requires reflection. It requires you to spend time alone with uncomfortable truths you'd rather ignore. But instead of doing that hard work, I chose movement. I chose distraction. I filled the deafening silence with a new connection. And while that connection felt good, it also blurred the line between genuine affection and just plain emotional escape. Sometimes, in the quiet moments after we were together, I would feel this flicker of emptiness. It wasn't because she was lacking anything, she was wonderful. It was because I hadn't fully confronted what I had lost. I had skipped a crucial step in the process. I had replaced before I had repaired. Getting even gave me momentum. It silenced the humiliation that had been screaming in my head. It shifted the power dynamic in my broken marriage, but it didn't answer any of the deeper questions. Why did the betrayal cut so deeply in the first place? What was already broken in me long before my wife ever stepped outside our marriage? And the biggest question of all, why did I equate being chosen by someone with being valuable as a person? Those questions just lingered beneath the surface of every new memory we tried to create. She deserved so much more than to be a symbol of my recovery. She deserved to be loved for exactly who she was, not for what she represented to my bruised ego. And slowly, that realization began to weigh on me more and more. I started catching myself comparing things, not her to my wife. Not directly anyway. It was more subtle. I was comparing versions of myself. The man I had been before the betrayal. Comfortable, secure, maybe even a little complacent. The man I became immediately after broken. Angry, vengeful. And the man I was trying to become now. With my wife, I had been comfortable. With this new woman, I felt alive, but also completely unsteady. Hype-aware that our entire connection was born from rupture and pain. Revenge has a certain clarity to it. It's sharp, it's focused, it's almost clean in its intent. But real love is complicated. It's messy. It asks for vulnerability without an agenda. It asks for you to be present without calculation. And if I'm being honest, I wasn't sure I could offer that yet. I wasn't sure I had it in me. When she would smile at me, or when she'd talk about future plans and just naturally include me in them, I would feel this quiet tightening in my chest. It wasn't a fear of her, or a fear of commitment. It was a fear of myself. A fear that I was building something new and beautiful on ground that hadn't fully settled yet, on a foundation that was still shaky. Getting even had felt so powerful at first. But that kind of power fades, and what remains when it's gone is responsibility. The responsibility for the choices I made when I was in pain. The responsibility for the emotions I invited into someone else's life. Someone who didn't ask for any of this baggage. And the responsibility to finally distinguish between just wanting to be wanted and actually wanting to love. The initial satisfaction I felt slowly transformed into deep introspection. I began to see that while revenge had shifted the external balance of power, it hadn't done anything to restore my internal one. Being with her wasn't wrong. The connection was real, but the reasons behind it mattered. And my reasons were a tangled mess, part genuine affection, part desperate validation, and part a whole lot of unresolved hurt. Healing demands brutal honesty with yourself most of all. And the more time I spent sitting with my own thoughts, the clearer it became that getting even had just been a step along the way. It was never the solution. It was a temporary fix for a much deeper problem. If you're going through something similar, remember that your worth is not defined by someone else's choices. It's okay to feel hurt, and it's okay to take the time you need to heal in your own way. You don't have to rush to fill a void. True strength is found in confronting the pain, not just covering it up. Thank you for listening. If this resonated with you, consider subscribing for more stories and reflections. Take care. In the end, there wasn't a winner. That was the part no one prepares you for. When betrayal happens and revenge follows, you imagine a final moment of satisfaction. A scene where the scales settle evenly, where dignity is restored, where someone stands taller than before. But real life doesn't close on triumphant notes. It fades into consequences. My wife lost me, that much was clear. Whatever version of us existed before her betrayal was gone, irretrievably. Even if we had tried to repair it, something essential had fractured. Trust, once cracked, never fits back together the same way. She could apologize. She could explain. She could even regret, but the innocence we once shared, the certainty that we were on the same team, had disappeared. But I lost something too. I lost the man who believed love alone was enough to protect a marriage. I lost the simplicity of devotion without calculation. Before all of this, I never measured affection against pride. I never weighed my loyalty against someone else's choices. I gave it freely, fully, without strategy. Afterward, everything became measured. When I chose to be with the woman my wife hated most, I told myself it was about moving forward, about reclaiming power, and in many ways, it was. I learned that I was still desirable, still capable of connection, still worthy of being chosen. But somewhere in that transformation, a certain softness in me hardened. I became more guarded, more aware of leverage, more conscious of how relationships shift when one person feels they've lost control. My wife felt it too. She saw the distance in me, not just physical distance, but emotional withdrawal. I no longer looked at her the way I once had. There was no anger burning in my eyes anymore, just something colder, something resolved, and I think that hurt her more than if I had screamed. Revenge is loud in action, but regret is quieter. It creeps in during ordinary moments. When you're alone in your car, when you see an old photo unexpectedly, when you realize that no matter how justified your reaction was, you can't rewind to who you were before the damage. The woman she hated most became part of my life in a way none of us could have predicted. She wasn't a villain. She wasn't a weapon. She was human, complex, sincere, deserving of more than being a symbol in someone else's war. And yet, that's partly what she became. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but inevitably. Because our connection began in the shadow of betrayal, it always carried that origin story with it. No matter how genuine our conversations were, no matter how real the affection grew, there was always a trace of the circumstances that brought us together. My wife lost her marriage. I lost my illusion of permanence, and the other woman inherited a relationship shaped by both. There is a certain loneliness in realizing that revenge doesn't restore what was broken. It only rearranges the pieces. I had thought that by balancing the scales, I would feel whole again. Instead, I felt altered. Stronger, perhaps. More self-aware, but also more cautious, more skeptical of promises. I no longer believed in unconditional certainty. I understood now how quickly stability can shift. When I looked back at the beginning of my marriage, I remembered a version of myself who loved without anticipating betrayal. That man trusted easily, forgave quickly, assumed mutual protection. After everything, I couldn't find him in the same way. And maybe that's the real cost. It's easy to say my wife lost me because she stepped outside our vows. That's true on the surface, but in another sense, we both lost each other long before the affair was exposed. Emotional distance doesn't appear overnight. It grows quietly, unnoticed, until one day it feels normal. My retaliation didn't rebuild what had been eroding. It simply confirmed that the foundation was already gone. As for the woman my wife resented, she became a mirror in her own right. Through her, I saw the parts of myself that had been diminished by betrayal. I also saw the parts that were capable of resilience. but I had to confront a difficult truth. She could not be responsible for repairing wounds she didn't create. No one walks away from these situations untouched. Not the one who betrays. Not the one who retaliates. Not the one who steps into the aftermath. In moments of quiet reflection, I understood that winning would have meant something different entirely. It would have meant confronting pain without turning it into a weapon. It would have meant healing before seeking validation. It would have meant choosing growth over symmetry. Instead, we each made choices shaped by hurt. My wife now lives with the knowledge that her actions ended something that once felt secure. I live with the knowledge that my response, however justified it felt, reshaped me in ways I'm still unpacking. And the woman she hated most carries the complexity of loving someone whose heart was fractured when she found it. There's no scoreboard at the end of this. No clear victor. Only lessons carved into experience. I learned that revenge can feel empowering in the moment, but empowerment born from pain carries its own shadow. I learned that being chosen again doesn't erase the sting of being replaced. I learned that sometimes the loudest acts lead to the quietest regrets. And in that quiet, you sit with the understanding that nobody truly walks away unscathed. In the end, this story was never really about revenge. It wasn't about proving a point. It wasn't about hurting someone back. And it definitely wasn't about winning. It was about what betrayal reveals. It reveals the cracks that were already there. It reveals the parts of us that depend too much on being chosen. And it reveals how quickly pain can turn into pride if we don't face it honestly. My wife betrayed me. I got even. But somewhere between the anger and the validation, I realized something important. Getting even doesn't bring you back to who you were. It just introduces you to who you've become. And sometimes, that version of you is stronger, wiser, less but also more aware that love isn't about control, and healing isn't about revenge. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt betrayal, pride, regret, or growth all tangled together, make sure you subscribe. Because here, we don't just tell stories about heartbreak. We tell stories about what comes after it.